engagement and making it a core value in our schooling systems. And there are great examples all around the country, and we're hearing a lot of those today. And so it's good to remember both the progress that is being made as well as reminding ourselves about the key aspiration and key goal that we seek to make real. The Family School Partnerships Bureau, Communities Partnership Bureau, I think that's a recent example of trying to strengthen that relationship between parent organisations and government agencies. And I think it has given us a boost to the parent engagement efforts that are going on. And there are examples of some good work that's been contributed to, led by the Bureau. But it's also just added, I think, a bit more, from my perspective inside the bureaucracy, it's added a bit more of an impetus to us in terms of how we engage with the parent bodies. It's an asset, but it's also a reminder to us about the need for us to have that regular conversation and regular engagement. And that also has been reaffirmed as well through the regular fora that we have with the representatives of the state and territory organisations inside APC and ACSO, and with the presidents and committees. And those fora, again, have really helped us try to articulate more clearly where it is that we in the bureaucracy need to be trying to focus our attention to get some improvements. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a moment. And of course, you are aware that the APC and ACSO do get funding from this department to assist with running their businesses, small though they are and under-resourced, absolutely. There is at least some assistance provided there. And I've heard loud and clear today about one of the key messages being around resourcing and how we need to improve on the way that support for parent bodies as well as individual parents and families needs to be addressed. The biennial forums, just briefly, we've been holding them since 2002. I've been involved in the last couple of years since I've joined this part of the department, which is the Engagement and Wellbeing Group. So that's our within the schools cluster, and we are the key point of contact with APC and ACSO and working with the Bureau. And that's basically because our brief in engagement and wellbeing is pretty much as it sounds, which is about trying to make sure that there is a focus on what are the elements of good practice in schooling that lead to good engagement with kids in their learning and good engagement with parents. And it's an attempt to try and keep a focus on one of the essential elements of the Melbourne Declaration, which is about students' well-being across the domains of well-being, from spiritual to health to a whole range. There's 7 elements of in the Melbourne Declaration that relate to wellbeing. So our job is to try and be a bit of an advocate within the department for those elements of education which are about students' whole self and their complete growth as individuals and as citizens, and trying to work with our colleagues who focus more on learning aspects or different reform agendas or particular initiatives that governments bring in, is to try and keep the debate and the dialogue going around the whole of student and the good practice that leads to well-engaged young people becoming confident and able to have independent lives with a focus on their complete well-being. So the forums that we've had over the last couple of years, the most recent one was only in April, and it characterised it as, for me, was a significant and clear call from parent bodies to say we want to move from being consulted, communicated with, to being a partner. That the reform agendas over the last several years have been significant. They've been rapid, and there is a massive agenda being moved through our schooling systems across the country now that should lead to some really fantastic improvements over time with a national curriculum, with teacher standards, and with a whole variety of school improvement foci. But loud and clear, we've heard that parents have not been adequately engaged in the policy agendas around those, and have not been adequately engaged as partners, but rather as more stakeholders. So yeah, moving from stakeholders to partner was the key message that we received. And they also reaffirmed several of the messages that we've heard this morning around the importance of exploring models for improving our resourcing and our support for parents in their own confidence and their capacity to be the best first teacher that they can be, and also resources to go to the challenge of how you can have teachers feel confident and capable to be able to work in partnership with parents. And as someone said this morning, it easily rolls off your tongue, but the challenges to create confident and capable parents and confident and capable teachers working in partnership together for the kids' benefit is a big challenge. Also, one of the messages out of the most recent forum was around the need to particularly address middle years wellbeing issues. We recognise that when you look at some of the key data sets that are available to us in both in learning from NAPLAN and other data indicators, but also many of the health and wellbeing indicators that we have available out of the ABS or the Institute of Health and Welfare, that the middle years are a real risk point for many of our children, and both boys and girls. And we are extremely concerned around the picture of the lack of engagement starts to drop off significantly in years 8 and 9. And in fact, by year 9, the disengaged were already well disengaged. And of course, I know you're probably all thinking, yeah, and it starts before they even get to school, but we do know that there are major influences that young teenagers are open to and have to deal with. And there was a strong feeling that as educators, as school system managers, we weren't really grappling with the complexities that our children entering into the junior years of high school are facing, and so consequently things like, for the last 3 years, the body image concerns expressed by young people have been in the top 3 factors raised by kids as their major concern in the national surveys that have been conducted. And similarly, mental health issues and coping with stress in school are consistently those top factors in the 11 to 14 age group in the survey data. So we agreed, yeah, that there is a need there that perhaps we aren't focusing on. And for parents, you know, I don't have the data on this, but I imagine shifting from parent of a primary school child to shifting into a parent of a teenager brings with it many anxieties and new sets of skills that are required, new sets of ways of dealing with the school that perhaps are quite different to those they used in the earlier years. There was also a strong advocacy around better use of the materials and the projects and the initiatives which are going on. You've heard lots of examples already this morning. There's more to come. There's lots of good practice, good work going on. But a major focus and challenge for us around, it goes back to the systematising issue. How do we make sure that the good practice and the evidence of success is able to influence our systems, not just those thought leaders and those willing to put themselves out ahead of the pack and experience the benefits? How do we make sure that we try and systematise that? So the forum, most recent one, was the most productive that I've participated in, and really energising for myself and my colleagues in the team who manage the focal point for this relationship. And that goes to the second part of what the forum does, the biennial forums with all your representatives from around the country, is that it puts a bit of a challenge to DEWA regularly and respectfully and politely, but it's a nice firm challenge that we can do better, and that we have a whole range of complementary but almost competing in many ways, competing for space, competing for time, competing for attention, competing for profile, a massive range of agendas. And we have a responsibility to try and facilitate linkages between those agendas and to bring an opportunity for the parent voice to be more included in those reform agendas. So that challenge has been heard clearly from the parent bodies at the forum. And I find that extremely useful, and it's always a good, shake-up. And when you deal with rapid reform agendas and rapid processes with competing priorities, those sorts of opportunities to reflect and check on how well we're doing are critical. And while I would not claim thus far that I or my colleagues have adequately responded to the challenge, we are making attempts, and I do commit to continuing to try and improve our performance so that your voices are better heard in the reform agendas across government. We also did hear loud and clear around the concern about preparation of teachers for working in our schools and in our classrooms with parents. And it does shock me that it is still the case today. You can have university pre-service degrees where a teacher gets no time on practicing how to talk with students and behaviour management. You can actually get through your degree without doing any behaviour management or ever learning how to treat a kid who's in trouble and needing help. And you can get through without actually practicing and testing out your skills in terms of how to work productively with a parent. That is a major issue and a challenge, and is one which is heard loud and clear by the department. And the forums also provide us an opportunity to give snapshots to our minister, and we've undertaken at this last forum to pull together those key issues, brief him on them regularly, and provide him an opportunity to think about ways that he can follow up with APC and ACSO and try to get a bit more of a demand coming for that stronger engagement. I think, that's probably enough. I think for me, listening into the discussions at the forum and with listening to Kaz and Peter in their involvement in various working groups, bodies, etc., that they do contribute to, I've used this as a sort of a working document for trying to organise my thoughts a bit, and it's a living document and changes every time one of these events occurs, to try and get a bit of system around it. So for me, to systematise the National Melbourne Declaration goal, I think of it on the top in terms of a bit of a supply chain, if you like. We need parents to be demanding quality engagement in schools, and we know that lots of parents don't feel confident about that. So we have to work on improving the quality of parent demand of their schools, and that involves confidence, capability, information, resources, the chance to test and fail and succeed again. We need school cultures. We've talked a lot about that, and you all know great leaders in schools who create a culture in a school which is welcoming and is genuine in its engagement, and that recognise that parent engagement can cut across that whole continua from involvement in activities, but right through from the reading at home. That's a genuine effort of engagement in kids' learning. To being, joint teachers in classrooms. I've been in classrooms where parents are active teachers with the paid professional teacher, through to the governance arrangements that can work really well when there is genuine engagement and lead to change in school culture, but also practices of the teachers because they understand and recognise the value of what parents can bring. And through to parents involved in review of the school, or involvement in the planning of the school plan, a genuine engagement in how is our school community going to operate, but then also in review and assessing the performance and quality of what a school is delivering. So the school culture and the framework and the most recent Low SES project, I think, are really, over time, the quality of the materials and the evidence base that we now have has just continued to progress. So there is really now a very rich vein of resources, materials available, case studies, research reports, resources available that enable school cultures. But as I said in my question this morning to Helene, I do believe that part of what is required to make sure that good school culture becomes systematised is a demand from parents, from our education authorities, from our ministers, that good schools do equal genuine and capable, skilled engagement with parents. And hence into system demand, for me, systems must be demanding that. They must create a demand and expectation of their bureaucrats, of their teachers, of their school leaders for that. And then, of course, there are regulation and standards. Like where because of the teacher standards, because of the school registration processes, because of the new school funding agenda that our government has, that is creating, I'd argue, new opportunities for ways of thinking about how to embed that expectation in terms of regulation and standard setting. And that there are new ways that we can look to ensuring that. I mean, the national curriculum, for example, with the general capabilities element of the national curriculum, gives us also a way to look at how teachers and schools are preparing kids with their social and personal competencies, and how we are looking at how well teachers do that and how well school leaders do that is an opportunity created by the professional standards related to the national curriculum. It's still forming and has got a way to go. So for me, that's a real, there's some fertile turf there for these sorts of concerns and issues that you have to be unpacked further. And then, of course, performance recognition and celebration. So I may sound like I'm just on about compliance. I'm not. I believe that the best relationships are in our schooling systems and in our classes and in our schools are formed by recognition of good performance and a way to celebrate and reward that, as well as being very clear about the standards and expectations we have for our schools. I think one of the reference this morning to the work that APC and ACSO did with the Gonski Review Panel, I think is very important to acknowledge, because it's front and centre in the Gonski Review Panel's thinking and in the words that they've used in their reports, the Finding 24 and the Recommendation 7. They are a genuine acknowledgement, I think, of the centrality of parent engagement in the kind of education that we're after for our kids. I think that's a really valuable point and a place for you and us to be going back to all the time. And it does provide a flag for us when we're advising our ministers about future funding systems, and ministers when they're listening to you as constituents, as organisations talking to them, that we know that if we get half the picture right in the funding review and get the dollars sorted with enough money for schools to be able to say to schools, you now have a resourcing standard which enables you, if you are efficient and effective, to be able to deliver the performance we're setting ourselves, which is a high performance level. The Gonski Review recommends a high performance standard for our schools and our kids, and I'm sure we all want that. And the aim is to establish a system which will enable schools to receive the kind of money they need to get there. But if we only have that without clear expectations and clear standards for the kind of school cultures and the kind of engagement and the conditions that we want to apply in our education systems, we will have probably missed quite an opportunity. So it's good that ACSO and APC, for example, are engaged in the funding review debates, because they are a good, strong, loud voice on the need to get the whole picture right. And we have in the Gonski report some strong advocation for getting the whole picture right and not missing out on the centrality. Although, you know, I'm allowed to say this because I am within my department an advocate for our relationship, and I do feel that we with every opportunity there's a risk, and there is a risk right now that the debate in our education, future funding education resourcing systems will not have adequately addressed how we support students' well-being across the domains of their person, and how we take this chance to systematise parent engagement expectations in our schools, and then plot a path to build all those elements that we know are necessary for great parent and school partnerships. And in fact, I was noticing when I was looking at this, if you look at the middle reign there, that's just me trying to, you know, form chunks of what's involved in this, what do we need to tackle in order to try and maximise the chance that our school, family, parent partnerships are going to be great. And the building parent carer, that's supposed to have skills on the end of it. Forgot that word. So yeah, can't just build more parents, unfortunately, or carers, you know. So yeah, we need, as everyone's heard, there are multiple facets of work and energy and clear thinking that need to occur in order to have a comprehensive approach to the kind of supports that our schools have, with teachers that are ready and willing and able, parents that feel confident enough to engage and learn, and then, you know, we might just get to the aspiration that we have. I think one recent new added element to our efforts here is Minister's recent decisions to implement an opinion survey of parents and students from next year. Don't know if you've caught that, but they have agreed that information will be collected either through integration of existing surveys used by schools, so a lot of schools do have a satisfaction survey, do ask parents, or through an instrument developed by the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. And they've also agreed these will be done at least by NELE. And they have also committed to publication of results through school annual reports, which can then be accessed through My School. So it's to me that represents, you know, it's a step, and it's a positive thing. My reading of that is we won't necessarily have consistent sets of questions across the country, so we won't yet have a nationally consistent picture, but okay, maybe that's not that important at the moment. But they have committed that at least biennially we will have school survey results on parents' opinions and students' opinions from next year, and they will be accessible to anyone who wants to find them by looking at the school annual reports on what kids and their parents have been saying about their school. So I think that's a positive step as well. I think, I reckon the summary that Anne and Jan this morning gave, I thought was a really excellent set of key messages. I thought their presentation on the results of the Low SES project was tremendous, and I like the 5 key messages as a good little simple set of prompts for me to be taking back into my work. And my colleagues, we all sort of nodded, yeah, that's a really nice little summary and those key messages. So they do, for me, say the challenge for us next is around getting a more systematic and integrated approach. We do have a range of opportunities at the moment. There are some major levers that are open for that to be included in. They're not necessarily demanding that at the moment, but I believe that the momentum is building, and our ministers are actually talking and thinking about it, and that's new and that's really positive. There is a door there, and so I'm going to take that and the other messages that have come out of the meetings today, and we will continue to be working with APC and ACSO and using the Bureau and its support to try and ensure that our department is building in parent engagement as a a core element across all of those reform agendas. So thank you for spending your time here and sharing all your views and thoughts and ideas, and keep prodding and prompting us, and we really appreciate your engagement in this. Thank you very much. In case there's questions.
Yeah, does that, just quickly before we wrap up, are there any questions at all of Matt?
One up the back.
Understand is that why don't our governments promote our parent clubs and our associations? It's sometimes we get the feeling on the ground, because they are the vehicle to have these conversations on all those areas, and they're a very strong vehicle and they've been around a long time. So I suppose that's where I want to prod and take that back to the Federal Minister.
Can I just clarify, did you say parent clubs and...
Parent associations. They're all called different
Right.
things in different jurisdictions, but that's... I'm just putting that out there,
Yep.
that local communities want to create other things, and that's fine, and we support that when they want to do that. But when they have existing clubs and existing parent associations, sometimes they're encouraged, oh, that's an old way of doing things, let's have a subcommittee of school council, let's do it this way. And we've got people on the ground, communities, that are feeling a bit anxious about that, because they know their communities, they know what they want, and they want to be promoted and sustained and supported.
Yep, thank you.
Right, Matt, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you, and I'll give that to you as a little token.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say a couple of quick words, and I think I can say this on behalf of Kaz as well, that working with Matt and his department, it's not just us prodding him, it's and his department. He certainly prods us, and it is a true engaged arrangement. And we do seem to have that ability to work well, and I do thank Matt and his department for that. I'd also, and listening to Matt, he was talking about the importance in relation to the middle years and the issues impacted on kids disengaging. And one of the things that at that time, one of the things that we do, and this struck me when he was talking about that, is that we do tend to forget that it's not just the changes that are happening on the kids and our ability to engage with the school, but it's also the changes that are happening on our children and our ability to engage with our children, which has a big impact on all of the impacts, all of the issues that are impacting on us and keeping that engagement of our kids. And Matt, just as an addition to increase the number of parents, I think you might have to become a grandfather. It's now afternoon tea time, people.
Good afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed those lovely brownies that were out there. Gives us that sugar hit until we finish up today. My name's Rowena Stuhlleiter, and I'm the Community Development Manager with the New South Wales Parents Council. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our next two speakers for the session this afternoon, Mary Tobin and John Stafford. The reason why I'm so interested in the work that they've been doing is, with three teenagers myself, that relationship that I have built with my children's school has really been invaluable and extremely rewarding. The combined experience of both Mary and John and their commitment to acknowledging that schools have a profound influence on the lives of young people and the important place that the school community plays in their lives is valuable for all of us in this room today. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the program that they're working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowena. And where are you, John? After this wonderful dialogue that's been happening today, John and I, in a space of about 1 minute, have just kind of reshaped this presentation a little bit. And so what we'll try to do in a very short period of time is look at the planning and the thinking that's gone behind the work that we're engaged in, which is very similar to the work that many people here are engaged in, to then look closely then, so what has the Family School Partnership Initiative really been about? And then most importantly, the reason we're all here, then to think about, so where to from here and what does it mean, both for us and for all of us in dialogue. So thanks for being here on a Friday afternoon at 3:30. It was interesting this morning when we started, and I felt really gifted to be here and hear from Helene, in that she spoke so strongly about the premise of all of this work being the research, which is absolutely clear that if we're going to redress and address equity and achievement in education in Australia and really be quite serious about addressing that gap, and more importantly, and just as importantly, to build stronger communities where all people have a sense of belonging and place, the role of parents, parent engagement, is absolutely central. But in some ways, John and I this afternoon would like to challenge that, although we say it's clear and it's essential, from a systems point of view, what's different? And so if we think about other areas, for example, the research around literacy and how literacy is so vital and that all young people need to be engaged in literacy. And yet if we went along to a sampling of schools across Australia or into jurisdictions and had conversations with system leader and asked them how this was positioned, where's the strategy, where's the investment, where's the staff, where's the thinking, where are the resources? And if some of those people said in response, well, yes, that is important, but we'll think about that next, or that is important, we might do that later on, they wouldn't exist. So where we're starting from this afternoon is where Helene began this morning, but challenging that view that across Australia, particularly at a systems level, where is this work located? So our simple story, our sharing today, which is just like the journey being shared right across this room all day, is saying, here's what we've been trying to do to challenge that assumption. And so the very nature of a focus on family school partners was around that notion of being disruptive, saying that if the reform was really being listened to, and if we see educational reform as a pie graph with the drivers of really looking at equity and achievement in quite different ways, the notion of parent engagement has to be in there at the same time, not as an added extra. And so the notion of disruptive innovation is what's been guiding our conversations. If we're serious about really looking at achievement and equity, what are we doing differently? And how do we force that agenda? Because if we go around in an invitational way only and add on and do more PL and have some additional resources and keep talking about the wonderful things that many schools across Australia are doing, people will remain comfortable. So very much using the wonderful Smarter Schools National Partnerships Initiative, we were challenged to think about how can we disrupt and interrupt what's currently happening at a systems level. And so that's where we started from. And so beginning from that premise, John and I and others had some fairly uncomfortable times and then brokered conversations across the levels of system. Because very often in systems, when we're looking at achievement and equity, we come back to old paradigms. We go back into the classroom, we go back into literacy, we go back into professional learning for teachers, we go back to, and with the best of intentions, we ask ourselves, what's something we can do? What's the one thing we can do? Let's go back to. So we look for short-term turnaround and we look for magic bullet solutions, or we look for the next bit of evidence that'll drive forward the change. We don't do that because we don't care. We do that because we care, really essentially. But we're systems people and we want to make a difference quickly. And so this was challenging that. This was saying through the Smarter Schools National Partnership reform agenda, and very much in concert with what our own system was saying, that we really did want to redress these inequities in educational outcomes. How can we do it differently? And so this initiative was premised on the fact that it couldn't be a singular approach, it couldn't be seen as a program, it had to actually shake us to the core and be quite disruptive. And so in exploring that notion, we said, well, what are the levels of interventions? What are the levels of discomfort? What are the levels of discussions that we have to shake up? If this doesn't become another funding period, another project, that in 5 years or 7 years we'll go back to our business and go back to the same discussions around learning. So it had a number of elements and it had a number of levels. At the levels, we looked at the system, the internal policy and research arm of the system and central office area. We also looked at the regions where the delivery is often happening to support the schools, particularly around school improvement, and we looked at the schools. And so in terms of looking at how can we use it as a bit of a catalyst to be quite disruptive around innovation that was needed and that we can't apologise anymore for, that these inequitable outcomes are not acceptable, we engaged in the Family School Partnership Initiative, and John will talk soon about the details around some of that. The focus wasn't about parent engagement on its own. The focus was coming back in to drive literacy and numeracy improvements through looking at the research, which has to be engaged with at a systems level if we're going to look at literacy and numeracy in different ways. We also wanted to, and it's been touched on this morning, say how do we look at the new people coming into the profession of teaching so that this becomes just their bread and butter. So we engaged in a partnership with Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, worked with them on a customised Master of Education program where when we think about the pie graph elements again, parent engagement is embedded into the course. We don't know whether we've done that perfectly yet. We're still learning all the time. So it's reflective practice. How can we reshape both pre-service education and post-grad education around this important area? And so ACU have been very willing and able partners, not in getting it right, because we haven't got that, but in ongoing professional dialogue. But we knew we needed that arm as well if we were about system reform and not just about a program. And so we're also about leadership formation, leadership at a whole variety of levels, leadership in the system, leadership in regions, leadership in schools, meaning all of the people that can really drive change and new understandings. And we knew if we were going to be completely disruptive, it meant that we had to explore what do we let go of, what do we reshape, so that if we looked back on this period of reform and we were true to the government's agenda, when we go back to central offices, when we go back to regions, when we go back to schools, what's different in terms of the nature of the staffing, the nature of the focus points. So we start to simplify what we're doing because we've got greater clarity around the things that make the difference. And so therefore what's left behind in terms of the structures of staffing, the structures of the bureaucracies in which we work at the regional level, at the central level, what's in place in schools and what's the dialogue. And so just before I pass to John, the questions that were driving the disruptive innovation, the questions that we were engaged in learning together and knowing that we didn't have the answers, even though we had the research, we know that research on its own won't drive change. It's how we engage with the research and what it means. And so we know that that is disruptive. So the questions that we felt really needed exploration at those three levels and across school communities was to go back to the basic premise about what is the nature of learning? How do we learn? Now, we know the research tells us that now, and we know that's been shared a lot. But we'd argue in many systems or many people within systems may acknowledge it, but what are they doing as a response to it? So really, what's the emerging narrative across each of our systems and across Australia around the very nature of learning, how and where it occurs? And then looking very purposefully at the where does learning occur and what does it mean? So the in-school factors and the out-of-school factors, which have already been referred to today, are really examined. So the language and the conversations which we're often part of, which are really sincere around how do we drive this agenda, isn't what we do in school and then we'll think about that later, but it becomes that the whole landscape around the nature of learning and where it occurs is pivotal to any of the conversations we have. So I think I'm now going to pass to John, who's going to give us a little bit of background around the actual Family School Partnership Initiative.
Thanks, Mary, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk about our little pet project and to join in the discussions and the dialogue that we've been involved in today, and I look forward to more of tomorrow. So when we think about those two questions, where does learning occur? What we had to really confront was that the evidence shows us clearly that it happens everywhere a young person is. And if we concentrate our efforts only in school, then it really limits our capacity to change the dynamics and change the outcomes. And you'd be aware, Sharon Butler flicks this slide around, and I know she travels around to lots of school communities, and this is one of her pet ones. But less than 20% of the time in schools. If we don't look at building on and influencing outside school, it limits our capacity to change the lives and influence the lives of young people. Oops. And the other piece of evidence that we used was this one from West Burnham, Atira and Farrow's book, Variables Influencing a Child's Chances, Life Chances and Wellbeing. That the school is about 20%. The other 80% of influence is outside school. And what can we do in the social area? How can we help communities to build social capital? And some of the workshops that I've been part of today have already shown some outstanding examples of how schools and communities work together to build social capital. But it is the key to change. And how can schools and families work together to influence those personal factors? And so what is the nature of learning? In Catholic Education Office Melbourne, we have a framework around contemporary learning. And this framework, recently developed and released, is quite expansive, but it focuses on in-school only. It hasn't gone to, if contemporary learning is the way of the future, how to encompass learning inside and outside the school. And so if we stop at the school gate, if we think learning begins when kids arrive at school and are dropped off by the parents, and then it stops when they're picked up by their parents, we limit it so much, and it just plainly ain't true. So what did we do? We looked at, in Catholic Education Office Melbourne, we'd been running a project called Schools as Core Social Centres since 2001 or 2002 as a partnership project with Vic Health. And what we'd learned from that project was that there's great strategic value in schools working in clusters, getting schools to focus on their community, building the capacity of the school community, so school leaders, families, parents, students and people in the wider community, and recognising that it's not just teachers and educators who play a role in the education of young people. So they were the drivers that enabled us to sort of reflect on a number of years' experience and therefore build towards what we now call the Family School Partnership Initiative. So it was premised on the notion of not keeping parents behind a gate, to actually, as Don Edgar talks about, making the boundary between school and community permeable. So where it stops and where it starts matters not, because it's all a place of learning. So we had in Melbourne 35 low SES schools, 31 primary and 4 secondary schools. And the model that we've developed has not only been implemented in Catholic Education Office Melbourne, but in the other 3 dioceses in Victoria. But in slightly different ways, because in the other 3 dioceses, which are country dioceses, obviously the challenges they face in terms of school size and distance between schools is quite different to that we face in Melbourne. So 35 schools. So we established 13 family school partnership convener positions. Strange title for a job, but one thing we wanted to do was not have a title that had been used before and probably didn't mean a great deal. Because we wanted it to evolve, we didn't want it to be constrained by parent liaison, community liaison, or anything else that pre-existed. And so when we explained it, we tried to avoid using that because we wanted it to evolve based around the school's needs. So 13 conveners, Each convener they were employed by Catholic Education Office Melbourne, and they were located or based in a school, working with a cluster of schools between clusters of 2, 3 or 4. The clusters were